Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the InduSoft webinar about scripting. I want to thank every and each one of you for participating on this webinar and for all your support for InduSoft over the years. We keep growing, increasing market share thanks to you and your support, and we really appreciate it. My name is Fabio Terezinho. I'll be conducting the webinar today. So I have first a brief introduction about the scripting interface in the InduSoft Web Studio. Then I talk briefly about the built-in language, which provides full portability across all the runtime engines supported by InduSoft Web Studio, including IoT View that runs on Linux or VxWorks. Then I spend more time talking about the main characteristics of VBScript in InduSoft Web Studio with some examples as well. Then I will open for Q&A. I'll try to leave as much time as possible for Q&A. So if you have any specific questions, feel free to write them on the chat box or on the Q&A box available on the WebEx bar at the top of your monitor. Very well. So starting with the introduction. First and foremost, InduSoft Web Studio is an easy-to-use configuration interface. So we keep evolving the product, and everything we design the product is done in a way that saves time when you are designing applications, when you are configuring applications, deploying, maintaining. So the whole configuration environment is designed in a way that you can very easily and very quickly put together different blocks we have in the product, on the graphical interface, on the alarms interface, on the history interface, on the communication interface, and just build your application based on those predefined blocks. However, from time to time, you need to create something more customized for your project. Maybe specific logics for your process, specific conditions for your machine. So the built-in scripting interface available in the InduSoft Web Studio gives you the flexibility to pretty much design advanced interfaces, sophisticated interfaces that go beyond the built-in blocks available in the InduSoft Web Studio. However, still keeping in mind that it should be as much as possible easy to use, we selected specific languages and we built the editor in a way that it makes as simple as possible and as productive as possible for you to create your scripts and troubleshoot them. And I will show those tools during the webinar. So nowadays we have two scripting interfaces, two scripting languages available in the InduSoft Web Studio. There is what we call built-in language, which is available in the product for virtually 2 decades. And there is VBScript, which is available in the product for probably more than 10 years, but was introduced in a later version of InduSoft Web Studio. So in most interfaces of the product, when you create, when you go to an interface where you can execute logic, like for instance in the command animation, you have the option to write it in the built-in language format or in the VBScript format. Also, if you come here to tasks, you have 2 different threads here, 2 different folders. There is math, which allows you to create logic blocks using the built-in language, and there is a script, which allows you to create logic blocks using the standard VBScript. So we support those 2 different languages across the product. And the built-in language, the main characteristics is that it provides portability across all the platforms. It works even in Linux and VxWorks with our runtime for those platforms called IoT View, since VBScript is not supported in those platforms, but the built-in language is. It supports all the tags and built-in functions from InduSoft Web Studio, and it offers the simplest syntax. It is even similar to Excel. You have a simple grid with 2 columns. So if I add a math group here, you can see. So it's always 2 columns, tag name and expression. So here in expression, you can either type or browse InduSoft function or any particular expression, like for instance the log of 10, for example, and the result goes to a tag in the tag name column. So InduSoft keeps executing row by row, executing the expressions and writing the result of the expressions into the tag in the tag name column. So it's very easy to use, very simple to use, and is supported across all the platforms. It's available on the graphic interface on the screen attributes. So if you open any screen in InduSoft, you have here screen logic in the screen attributes, and you can write logic using the built-in language that is executed when the screen is open, while the screen is open, and when the screen is closed, again with the syntax, tag name, and expression. You can have it also on the command animation from the objects, as I displayed now, and the background tasks on the math sheets, as I showed a few seconds ago. VBScript. VBScript is more flexible. It gives you more power to use external controls, external COM objects, linked to external ActiveX controls. It is still a very simple syntax, and it is standard. It's not created by InduSoft, so there is a lot of documentation, a lot of examples on the internet, in books, different sources of information, where you can copy the examples, the template, paste into a VBScript interface in InduSoft Web Studio, and just run it. So it is a standard language. We just we augmented that in our own editor to make it easier for you to use VBScript. So it's available here in the graphics script, in any screen. It's available also in what we call screen scripts. You have functions that can be executed when the screen is open, while it's open, and when it's closed. And here in tasks, we have also in the task script. So we have made some enhancements in the VBScript. We'll go through them. But for instance, I can create a variable here. And if I want to set a tag name here, if I want to write the value from a tag name to X, just have to use the prefix $. Then I see all the built-in functions and all the tags from InduSoft. So this is something, and we have IntelliSense as well, something we built in our VBScript interface editor, so you can use the standard VBScript, still easily use the InduSoft tags and InduSoft built-in functions in a VBScript interface. This is the internal architecture of InduSoft. The core, we have two main components. We have Studio Manager.exe, is a process that runs in background. It executes all the tasks that run in background, including communication tasks, without the graphical interface. And there is another module called Viewer.exe, which renders the graphical interface, the screens. So even the secure viewer thin clients executes this module, and even the local viewer or the remote viewers, which are the secure viewer thin clients or the web thin clients, they communicate with the Studio Manager through the TCP/IP server module from Studio Manager. So it's always a TCP/IP communication between the graphical interface and the background tasks to give us the flexibility to have multiple instances of the viewer running locally in different monitors, for example, or remotely in secure viewer thin clients, and still communicate with the same project, with the same tags, with the same tasks. And all this communication here is event-driven. So there is no pooling to optimize the performance. When tags change on the viewer, they are sent to the TCP/IP server. When tags change in the Studio Manager, they are sent to the viewer. And in Studio Manager, the core component is a block called Tags Engine, where we keep all the tags from InduSoft Web Studio. And InduSoft Web Studio is a multi-threaded system, so we have all those different threads or tasks that are running in parallel. And when you create your project, you can come here to Home, Tasks, and you can define which threads should run automatically when you start the application. Just change the thread from manual to automatic, and when you run the application, that particular thread runs. So this list here is pretty much the list of threads available in the Studio Manager. And by default, the background task is set to automatic, and background task is the thread that executes all the interfaces that you configure here under the Tasks tab, including the math groups and the script groups, which run in independent subthreads. How is the execution of the tasks math and tasks script? I can create different math groups, like for instance, group 1, and I have something in the execution, like seconds equals, or let's do something, tag A equals to 1, for example. Okay. Now I have the math group number 1. Can create another one, for instance, group 2. And in the execution, I have 1, for example, all the time. Group 2. And I'll create one more. Group 3, and I'll have here execution 0, or leaving blank. So the way it works, while the background task is running, it checks the execution fields from the group 1. If it is true, executes the whole group, all the rows in this group, no matter what happens with the execution field while the group is being executed. And after finishing it, then it checks the execution field of the group number 2. If it is true, executes the whole group up to the last line, and then check the execution of the group 3. If it is false, jumps this group and goes to the next one. If there is no next one, then the next one is the first one. So InduSoft keeps scanning all those groups following this algorithm. We check the execution field. If it is false, check the execution from the next group. If it is false, check the execution from the next group. And whenever the execution is true, execute that whole group and then check the execution from the next group. So the way I configured here, math 1 will be executed continuously while tag A is equal to 1, while this condition is true. Math 2 will always be executed because the execution is always true. And math 3 will never be executed because the execution is 0, it's always false. A common misconfiguration I see in some applications is something like this, seconds. The execution field is a true-false field. So if you write second there, the tag seconds is a system tag that goes from 0 to 59, just like the Windows clock, and changes of value every second. So in InduSoft, 0 is false, any value different from 0 is true. So if you use seconds in the execution field, this field will be true for 59 continuous seconds within a minute, and false for 1 second within the minute. It does not mean it will be executed 59 times in the second, because typically the execution of the scan of the math groups could happen several times every second. So if you have seconds here, it means this particular group is executed several times, possibly multiple times each second for 59 seconds, and then it's not executed at all for 1 whole second. If you want to call this group, execute this group once every second, then you should use different techniques. Like for instance, just like I had in the first script, tag A equals to 1. So within the script, you make tag A receive the value 0, and use, for instance, the scheduler interface. So every second, you make the tag A receive the value 1. So every second, event clock, the value 1 is written to tag A. When the math thread checks the condition field, there you go, it sees, oh, tag A is equal to 1, so it executes the script once, resets tag A, and do not execute this group anymore until tag A goes to 1 again, which is going to happen just in the next second. And if you want to do that every 5 seconds, just change here to 5, and so on and so forth. So this is the execution for not only the math groups, but also the script groups. Works exactly the same way. So you have here, each group has an execution field. When the execution is through, the whole group is executed. Otherwise, we jump this group and go to the next one. The script has just one additional feature here called startup script, which is a built-in group which is executed once every time you run your application. Technically speaking, every time that the background task is started. This startup script is executed once, and then InduSoft keeps looping through the script groups. Very well. Now I have at least one slide with additional characteristics about the built-in language only. So again, it supports all the tags and all the built-in functions from InduSoft. If you go to any expression field in InduSoft, you can go to Start, Insert Tag Expression, and here in the Object Finder, you can find and use any of the more than 400 built-in functions for different transactions, for file, for database, for FTP, statistical, arithmetic, logarithmic, open screens, graphical functions. Even loops are available in the built-in language. So the syntax for any tag expression field is that if you have an expression field, you just write the tag name there. Let's say here tag A. And in the expression, you write the function or the complete expression whose value must be returned to the tag in the tag name column. Like for instance, 10 times the function range, randomic. So you never use the equal sign to attribute values to tags. If you do something like this, tag A equals to 20, you are not writing the value 20 to tag A. You are comparing. Is tag A equals to 20? If true, returns 1. Otherwise, returns false. So this line here between tag name and expression is an implicit equal sign to assign values. InduSoft executes the expression, and the result of the expression goes to the tag name. I wrote a note here, just a tip. In InduSoft, you have many caption fields, label fields, where you can add InduSoft expressions using the built-in language, but you just need to write them between curly braces. So for instance, I have the caption of the field. If I want to make this caption dynamic, I can write an expression here, tag A for example, between curly braces. So during the runtime, InduSoft executes the expressions between the curly braces and displays the result of those expressions. Okay, now we can focus on VBScript. This is a diagram of the scope for VBScript. So when you use the built-in language, you just have access to the InduSoft tags and the InduSoft functions. And all the InduSoft tags are global. If you see on the diagram, the tags engine is available to all modules of InduSoft Web Studio. So you change a tag value, it changes everywhere. In VBScript, you can create your own functions and you can create your own variables, VBScript variables, which do not count for tags in the license. In this case, there is the concept of scope, where those functions and those variables can have scope in different interfaces. So first, we have what we call global procedures. So here in global procedures, you can create your own libraries of functions, one or multiple library of functions. This is nothing more than, again, a library. So if you want a function, let's say, to calculate the area, the area from a circle. So you create a function, let's say circle area. You need to know the radius to calculate the area, so it's a parameter. and then you make here the function circle area is equal to radius to the pi number. We have a built-in function called pi. I use the color sign times radius squared. So every time that you call this function circle area, it's going to return the result of this expression here. So the global procedure is a library of your own functions that you create, and you can call those functions. You can execute those functions both from the background task, from those scripts here that are executed under script, as well as from the graphical interface, from everything that you do from the viewer. So here, the global procedures, that's a very important concept. There is no execution here. There's not a thread executing global procedures. It's just a library of functions that can be called either by the graphical process or by the script thread, available for both. Then you go to the background task. Let's talk about the background task first. You have here the startup script, and you can create additional scripts. Let me close all the tabs. Okay, so we have the startup script here, and I can create additional groups, like group 1, for example, with its own execution. So if I create a variable, and let's create another group here, just to make a more complete example, group 2. So if I create a variable here in the startup script, like dim var a, dim, by the way, is the keyword you use to declare variables in VBScript. So if I create a variable in the startup script, this variable is available to any other script under startup script. So I can make here var b equals var a. And I do not have to declare variable a in the script number 1, because it's already declared in the startup script, so its value is available to all the other script groups. However, if I declare a variable in a specific group, just like I did here in the script 1, I declared variable b, this variable b is available only in this group. If I go to the group 2, I can use variable a, because it was declared in the startup script, but variable b does not exist here. So I cannot share the value of variable b between group 1 and group 2. When you declare a variable in a particular group, it has local scope on that group only. If you want a variable to share values across different groups, you declare it in the startup script. So that's what this diagram here means. On the graphical interface, so everything that's graphical in InduSoft goes to the graphics tab. In the graphics interface, you have this group here called graphics script. You can create your own variables here, like var x, for example. All the variables that you declare in the graphical scripts, in the graphics script interface, is available to all screens. So if I go to a particular screen, let's create a new screen here. And if I go to a particular screen, can come here. And if I want to use that variable, I just need to use the prefix graphics dot, and you see here the variable x that I created in the graphical script. So the variables that I create in the graphical script is available for all screens. But if I create a variable here in the screen script, is available only for this screen, only in this screen script. If I declare a variable here in this comment interface, dim var y, this variable is available only for this command interface, not for other objects, not for other screens. So to sum up, when you declare variables or functions in the graphics script, it's available to all screens using the prefix graphics. When you create variables in the screen script or the objects on the screen, it's available only for that screen or only for that particular object. And this table summarizes pretty much what I just described. So those are all the interfaces in the InduSoft Web Studio where you can use VBScript. You have global procedures where you cannot create variables, you can create procedures, and they are available both to the background task and to the local viewer. However, the global procedures is just a repository, just a library. There is no execution here. When you call those functions from the background task or from the viewer, that particular function is executed by one of those interfaces. In VBScript, you can declare variables in procedures, functions, or subroutines, and they are available on the VBScript, screen scripts, and script controls, screen objects, using the graphics.prefix to them. When you create variables or functions in the screen script, they are available on the local screen script and all the objects within the screen. And when you create variables into the controls, into the animations, commands, ActiveX controls, .NET controls, they are available only in those controls, only in those individual animations. That's for the graphical interface. For the background task, VBScript allows you to create variables and procedures that can be called by any background script group. And when you create variables in the script groups, they can be called only within that group itself. So it's a simple summary of the scope for variables and functions in all VBScript interfaces from InduSoft Web Studio. Now let's talk about the editor. Again, VBScript is a standard language. A major advantage was not created by InduSoft. You can reuse a lot of documentation and examples available online and in books. But to make it easy to use, we just created the $ prefix in VBScript in our editor, allowing you not only to browse with IntelliSense, but use, configure tags or built-in functions from InduSoft in any built-in in any VBScript interface. You use the dim keyword to declare variables and const to declare constants in VBScript. And you can use the call word to call predefined procedures, functions that you create in the global procedures, for example. And in our editor, we show IntelliSense. And in the IntelliSense, we use different icons to differentiate functions and tags from different types. So just to show really quick here, so dim, in this command interface here, I create this variable, can use const to create constants, like for instance, my radius equals to 100. Can use the function call to call procedure. If you press Control space, you can browse all the functions automatically as well. So I have the function, let's say, zoom or ABS, for example, from VBScript. And here I can use my radius, for example. If I want to use an InduSoft function, or tag, I just use $. So I can make this tag is equal $, for example, the InduSoft ABS function, my radius, the variable my radius. So whenever you use $, it means it's an InduSoft built-in function or InduSoft built-in tag. If you do not use $, it means it's either a VBScript function or a VBScript variable. That's simple. That's it. Now, for troubleshooting, we offer many different ways to troubleshoot your scripts in InduSoft Web Studio. One that is very useful is the built-in function trace. Whenever the trace function is executed, the results of the argument from the function can be displayed here in the output window. All you have to do is right-click on the output window, go to Settings, and enable Trace Messages. You can also enable here Insert Date Time, so you see one message on each line with a different timestamp. And here in this button, for example, let me close everything. No. Okay, so I'll create something from the scratch here. I'll create here a simple script, declare a variable A. I'll make A equals to the tag second. And if I want to know the value of the variable A when the script runs through this point, can use the function trace, $, because it's a built-in function. And here, whatever I want to display in the output window, like the value of the variable A is, use ampersand to concatenate values in VBScript, and here the value of the variable A. So I can run it, can save it as test, can run it. When I click here, it executes the script and shows the message, the value of the variable A is 5. So whenever you want to know if the code is being executed in a particular point or what's the value in a particular point, you can use the trace function. Sometimes it's more suitable to use a message box. So VBScript has a built-in function called message box. And whatever you pass to the message box as an argument is displayed during the runtime as a pop-up message box. So I can use here call message box, no $, because message box is a VBScript function. And when I click here, I see a message box. The value of the variable A is 52. Useful for troubleshooting in many cases as well. In VBScript, there is this configuration called on error resume next, on error go to 0. Everything that happens between those two statements will not stop the VBScript even if you have a legal execution, like a division by 0, for example. So in this particular example, if I didn't have the on error resume next, as soon as I make 10 divided by 0, the script would stop here, and everything else in that script interface would not be executed. So if I want to protect a particular area, I write that particular area between the statements on error, resume next, on error, go to 0. And if you want to check within that area, if there is an error or not, you can use the variable err.number. If it is different from 0, it's because there was an execution error in that block. And if you want to know what is the message, the string message for that error, you can use the variable err.description. And that's it. In addition to those basic tools, we also provide in InduSoft Web Studio a complete set of tools for troubleshooting in the Debug tab. So when you come here to execution, you can just run your project, or you can do what we call run in debug here. So if I run the project in debug, then the execution will stop every time it finds a breakpoint. So in any VBScript interface, you have this bar here, where let's go, for instance, in global procedures here. There you go. You have this bar where you can add breakpoints. For instance, I can come here and add a breakpoint. Can add as many breakpoints as I want. When I run in debug mode, whenever the execution finds a row with a breakpoint, it stops right there. And then I can analyze, use here locals tab in Database Spy to analyze the value of the VBScript variables. While the execution is stuck there, you can see the stack frame to see how the code got to that function. So that button called that function, that called another function that got to this point. And you can go to the tasks frame to see how many tasks are running and what are their states. So very useful, very powerful when you are troubleshooting sophisticated scripts. And we have some screenshots here of those different interfaces when you are running in debug mode. Very well. We'll go through some basic VBScript statements. Obviously, it's a very flexible language. You have all the basic statements like conditional statements. You can have a if-then statement inline. So just if condition, then execution. You can have a if-then-else statement, and then it cannot be inline. You can have if condition, then in the next line or lines, everything that should be executed if the condition is true. In the next line, else, everything else below it that should be executed if the condition is false, and end if. Obviously, the else and everything that should be executed with the else is optional. You could have just a if without else. You have the if-else statement if you want to keep checking additional conditions on each else statement. And you have the select case. So select case is very useful when you want to do a kind of multiplex. So you have a particular variable or tag or expression, and for different possible results of this expression, you want to execute something different. So the select case is available in VBScript as well. You have obviously several looping statements. You have regular for loops. You can define steps for each loop interaction. By default is 1. You can have for objects like arrays, for example, you can use the for each item in this array, my array. Then for each interaction, it automatically grabs a different array element in this item variable. And you can have loop statements using while or until. So for instance, do while checks the condition before executing the loop even the first time. And you can use do loop while to execute the loop at least once. And after the first execution, check the condition to decide if it should keep executing the loop. And do until and loop until, the same thing, but it keeps executing while the condition is false. In the do while keeps executing while the condition is true. And obviously, whenever you use do loop statements, please be extremely careful and make sure that you do not create what's called an endless loop. So a condition where the loop is always there, never goes out, because then you would lock that entire thread, either the graphical interface or the background script interface, in that loop forever. If the loop never exits, if the loop never has a condition to get out of it. Here I put together a few of many different VBScript functions that are very common and very useful in many cases. For date and time, date add and date if are very useful whenever you want to make calculations with dates, like add a few days to a particular date, or months, or minutes, or seconds, or subtract. Find out what's the difference in days, or minutes, or months between two different dates. Can use date add and date if respectively. There are some conversion functions to ASCII, from ASCII to character, from character to ASCII. Format function to format date time, for example, in military format, AM, PM, for example. Math functions, array functions, string functions, lowercase, uppercase, and functions like message box that I already showed an example. Input box, similar to the message box, but shows a pop-up where the user can input a value. And create object whenever you want to use an external component or ActiveX control in your VBScript interface. There are some advanced built-in functions from InduSoft Web Studio that are very useful in VBScript in some interfaces. For instance, run global procedure on server. If you remember the first diagram, everything that I configure in a VBScript interface on the graphical interface is executed on the viewer. But sometimes I want a particular code to be triggered from the viewer from a button, but I want it to be executed on the server, to load a file on the server, save a file on the server for different reasons. by doing that, for instance, if I call here when I click on this button, call zoom alarm, then when I click on this button, this function here, zoom alarm, will be executed on the viewer. But if I use the syntax, $, run global procedure on server, zoom alarm, then when this function is found, the function zoom alarm will be executed, but it will be executed on the server, on Studio Manager, not on the viewer or on the thin client that's running the graphical interface. So very useful in many situations. Run global procedure async. It pretty much allows you to create a new VBScript thread on the fly to execute another function. So for example, if I come here to tasks, remember that the execution is synchronous. InduSoft checks the execution from script number 1. If it is true, executes the whole script number 1 before going to the script number 2. And if I have a call here for any function, when the script finds this call, it executes the whole function and then comes back to the next line. When I use run global procedure async, run global procedure async, and I define here the name of the function I want to execute, then what happens is when InduSoft finds this particular script, it creates a whole new thread to execute this function in parallel and continues the execution of this script and goes to the next script. So whenever you have a function that does not need to be executed synchronously, and typically in case where you have functions that take a long time to be executed, like a large report, exporting data, things like that, this is very useful to call this function this way so you do not stop the execution of all the task scripts while that function is being executed. And you can check the status of that thread using run global procedure async get status. You can also define tag functions here to be executed automatically when a particular tag goes to false, to true, or when that tag changes for whatever reason. Database interfaces. One of the most common uses of VBScript is database interfaces to execute transactions with databases. And fortunately, InduSoft provides a very easy interface to save and retrieve data from any external SQL relational database. It's all built in InduSoft Web Studio and very easy to use. So just to show a quick example, I'm going to use Microsoft SQL Server here. I'm going to create a brand new database called Webinar, for example. And now in this database I have no tables, nothing. Now first I have to link InduSoft to this particular database. So to do that I go to Tasks, Database ERP Connections, right click, and create here a connection string for that database. So in this case I select the provider for SQL Server, write here the name of the SQL Server server, and select the catalog, the database I want to interact with, for instance Webinar. Test connection succeeded. And now I give a name, an alias for this connection. For instance, DB. Could be any name. But the fact is, every time I want to execute a connection with this database using this connection string, I can reference to the alias DB. Now, if I go, for instance, on the screen here, let me close everything again. No, okay. So if I go to a particular screen, let's go here to test. If I want to execute a transaction with this database, I can simply I'll create a variable here called SQL, for example, and in this variable I will write the SQL statement I want to send to the database. For instance, create table, my table with the column C1, which is an integer. So the value of this variable is a valid SQL command, a SQL statement. If I want to send this, execute this SQL statement to that database, all I have to do is call the built-in function dbExecute. The first argument is the name of the connection I want to use. So the connection DB I created a few seconds ago. And the second argument is the actual statement. So I will execute the value of the variable SQL. So if I didn't do anything wrong, I can run this application. And when I click on this button, I go to the database, refresh, and I see the table, my table, with the column C1, which is an integer. What if I want to insert, update, delete information? Same thing. You just change the statement here. So I can say insert into my table, which has the column C1, values. And here, for instance, I can concatenate, let's say, the value of the tag seconds. So it's going to execute. This whole expression is executed. The value, the result of the expression, is written to the variable SQL, and the dbExecute function executes this SQL statement. So this one is the button to insert. This one is the button to create the table. Save it. Now insert, search, 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 search a few times. So if I select this table in SQL Server, you'll see each time I clicked insert, it inserted into this table of records with the value of the tag time. What if I want to read data from the database? Now it takes more functions because I want to manipulate this data, right? So I'll create a quick example here. So I still need to define a SQL statement like select everything from my table. But now I want to grab the information and I want to manipulate the information I'm reading from the database. So I create a variable called numCur, another one for number of rows, another one for the row itself. And another one, txt, will have the results from the table, from the database. So here, this SQL variable has the select statement I want to execute to read data from database. Then I can execute this function called dbCursor OpenSQL, where the first argument is the connection, the second is the SQL statement. This function queries the database according to the SQL statement, brings the information to memory, and returns to this variable a handle, which is, you can think of this as the memory address where the query is available in run memory. And I use it whenever I want to manipulate information from that memory area. For example, if I want to know how many rows were returned, I can use the function dbCursor row count, and I pass as argument the number of the cursor returned by the previous function. And this variable knows how many rows I have. Then I can have a for loop for row equals to 1 to num rows. Next. For each loop interaction, I want to call dbCursor next, numCur, to go to the next row, next row, next row. And for each interaction, I make txt is equal to the previous value, and one more function, dbCursor getValue. This function, dbCursor getValue, goes to that particular memory area where you have the results from the query, and return the value for a particular column that you specify, like column C1. And since I want to keep concatenating, I will concatenate with VBCareReturn line feed. So it keeps adding one different value to a different row. When I'm done with my script, very important, dbCursor close, numCur. This function releases the result of the query from memory. If you do not do that, every time that you open the cursor, you add information to the memory, and if you do not release the memory, you have a memory leaking issue, and eventually you run out of memory available in the system. Finally, I can message box the value of the tag txt. And this one is the select example. So I click here. It selects all the values in that particular table and show the value of the variable txt, where I have the value from each row in a different row here using char return line feed to separate the values. So with those functions that I showed here in a few minutes, you can execute absolutely any transaction with any SQL relational database using InduSoft Web Studio. You can also interface with external controls like ActiveX controls or con servers. I will create a very simple example here using ActiveX control, which is a particular case of con servers. So if I go to ActiveX controls, can select an ActiveX control here, like for instance, let's pick Microsoft web browser. I'll change the background color of the screen so it's easier for you to see the object. And you can resize it. Good enough. That's pretty much a web browser, and it has its own properties and methods and events. Now I can give a name to this control, to this browser, like MB, my browser. And now very easily on the graphical interface, I can simply write the control name, MB, dot, and we show all the properties and methods from that particular control. So I'll say navigate to, and pass as argument the URL I want to navigate to. Save it, click here, and I see the Google website right there on the ActiveX control. Could use that to show PDF documents, anything that you can display in a web browser using this simple ActiveX control with this simple VBScript interface. Here another example using a Microsoft object called sapi.spvoice, and pretty much writing this script here. You can pass as argument a text, could be an alarm message, for example. And this function will use the computer speakerphones and pretty much read this text in a robotic voice, of course, but it pretty much reads the text with the default voice or any other voice you pick within the function. So it's a very simple function that allows you to pass a text and make the computer spell that text using the computer speakers. So again, that's what I mean when I say that VBScript gives you a lot of flexibility. You can use the InduSoft functions, InduSoft tags, but you can also use many external controls and objects available through a con interface. Just additional references here, there is the W3 Schools website where they have a very nice tutorial about VBScript. There is a lot of information on the Microsoft MSDN as well as in InduSoft itself. We have a VBScript manual available to download from the website. And if you go to our help here, in Appendix VBScript, you have a lot of information, tricks, and examples about VBScript. Goes from global procedures, from the basics, the diagram I used in my presentation, all the way down to tips and tricks and examples. So with that, I would like to open for Q&A. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to write them on the Q&A box or in the chat box on the WebEx bar, which is on the top of your monitor. So we have a question here. What happens to runtime when a script breaks? Example, division with 0. Will it abort? Will it recall it next time? Will it hang? So good question, and that's pretty much what we discussed with the on error go to next. So let's say that I have here something like this. Let me create another button, right? So in x equal 10 by 0, x equal to 100. So in this particular example here, say here, error. In this particular example, when this division by 0 happens, this particular script aborts here, so it never executes this line here where x receives the value 100. So the script aborts here. Of course, does not crash the viewer, so you can click another button, or you can even click that button again in the future, but this atomic execution is aborted here. Again, if you want to prevent that and you want to make sure the script goes on to the following lines, you can say on error, resume next, on error, go to 0. Now, even though you have a division by 0, this last line is executed and the variable x receives the value 100. If you have the same thing in a script group, for instance here, by the way, you can use single quotes or double slashes to comment lines, and they'll be in green. So without the on error, resume next, on error, go to 0, when this division by 0 happens, these particular groups aborts execution, and then InduSoft checks the execution of the next group and next group and next group. But this group here will abort execution right here, and the next line, the line 13, will not be executed unless you have this piece of code between on error, resume next, on error, go to 0. So, good question. So, another question is if VBScript is available for SMA thin clients. The answer is absolutely yes. Good question as well. SMA thin clients are thin clients supported by InduSoft Web Studio based on HTML5. So you can visualize it in web browsers running on iOS, on Android, iPads, iPhones, tablets, Chrome on the PC, and so on. So VBScript is available even on SMA thin clients because we emulate the scripts in a thin client session on the server. So full support for VBScript on the SMA thin client. VBScript is not supported when the server is IoT view, when the server is running on Linux or VxWorks. Eventually, we will have JavaScript in parallel to VBScript available in the product. So even IoT view on Linux or VxWorks will be able to execute JavaScript. Nowadays, IoT view can execute the built-in language. Any other questions? Yes, one other question here. Script execution. I set to seconds, but it executes numerous times rather than once every second. How to prevent it to happen? This is something we addressed during the presentation as well. That's exactly what will happen if you have seconds here, because seconds, the tag seconds, if I monitor this tag, it will be true, it will be greater than 0 for 59 seconds within a minute, and during those 59 seconds, this script could be executed hundreds of times, depends on the overall scan rate. And during 1 second within the minute, it's 0, and then during that 1 second, this script is not executed. So if you want to execute a particular script every second, you can have a tag here, like let's say tag run, an integer for example. And you can say I want to execute every time that tag run is equal to 1. So by the end of this script, tag run receives the value 0. So just after it executes, it disables the execution. And you can use, again, the scheduler and say clock time 001. I make the tag run equals to 1. So every second the tag run receives the value 0, enabling the execution of this script. As soon as it's executed once, the tag run goes to 0, disabling the execution of this script until tag 1 goes back to 1 again in the next second. So that's how you can execute a particular script once a second or once whatever period of time you want to define. Very welcome. So with that, we are on the top of the hours, and we don't have additional questions. So I would like to thank every and each one of you for taking the time for this webinar. And if you have additional questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day or a great evening everywhere. See you in the next webinar. Goodbye.